Okay, so I'm speaking to you today about a new report that has been released by the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, Israel. The title of the report is Strengthening the Syrian Army, a Threat to Israel. And here to talk with me about this report and to go through the details of this report, it's a very interesting bit of research, is Kevork Almassian, one of my good friends, colleagues, and one of the best journalists, particularly on Syria, but on all geopolitical events that are ongoing at the moment. And there are many of them. So Kevork, thank you for agreeing to join me today in amongst your busy schedule.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for having me. I am always like to call you a friend because our relationship is not a business relationship or journalistic relationship. Although people may not know this information, we haven't met personally yet in this universe, but we will soon, inshallah.
I hope so. So coming back to this report, I mean, there's a huge amount in it. Before we came on, I told you I'd taken out like 36 points. I don't think we're going to be able to cover all of those, but we can certainly look at the main ones. And of course, the report itself, which was published in Hebrew, will be available in the show notes. So I'm just going to read the introduction in the report itself. So it talks about, after the civil war, Syria has been undergoing accelerated rehabilitation of the military forces in parallel with the country's civilian reconstruction, and necessarily at its expense. I want to talk to you about this also. Although the Syrian army faces many challenges and it is still far from being a threat to Israel, this article examines its intensification efforts, which already present a potential for a strategic threat that must be recognized. In the conventional plane, missile capabilities such as UAVs, drones, and air defense, and in the unconventional plane, chemical weapons attack capability and nuclear capabilities may be developed. Finally, the article will be summarized in recommendations to Israel in view of these threats, mainly defining red lines for Syrian intensification, incorporating the campaign activity for the war between the wars. Now, to begin with, I've heard this phrase many, many times, that Israel media, Israeli academics have used in many instances, even I think before 2011. What do they mean by the war between the wars?
First of all, I would like to say that this institute, I have digged in a little bit into this institute, and in their own website, they say that the purpose of this institute is to advance the national security of Israel and its continuation in the region as a Jewish state. And of course, they also mix some of the other things like democratic Israel and Jewish at the same time, which is a contradiction. If you want to be a democratic state, in my opinion, it has to be democratic for all citizens, regardless of their religion, sect, or ethnicity. However, I always want to take such researches with great seriousness because, in my opinion, this type of research centers or institutes are parallel intelligence apparatuses working with the security apparatuses, not necessarily directly with the security apparatuses, but they are complementing the work of the security apparatuses in terms of collecting information, data, through the citizen journalism, through the open sources, and they are complementing the information that in my opinion, the Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, and the other military intelligence could have about Syria and about other regional countries. Therefore, if you see the amount of information that they have detailed in this article, Syria has undergone in a very big and brutal, let's say, proxy war. They call it, of course, a civil war, but they are definitely trying to give the impression that there is an upcoming war between Syria and Israel. And this is probably the intention behind this research that they published, which says that Syria has undergone or went through a brutal war and its military capabilities were reduced in some places, but in other places, Syria has accelerated its, for example, production of certain type of weaponry in Syria, and this can pose a security threat on Israel. How I see this analysis in a way that Israel had a role in Syria in this, what they call it is a civil war, or whether or a proxy war. The intention of removing the Syrian government from the beginning was not because the United States wanted to remove Assad. It was because Israel wanted to remove Assad, and it was Israel that was lobbying in the United States to reduce the military capabilities of the Syrian side. So if we see this context and detect the actions of the anti-Assad groups on the ground, and we're talking about 2011 and 2012, I will give you a few examples. Assassination of military engineers, scientists, researchers in some of the research centers that these experts used to work. It's mentioned in this research article. So some of them who were engaged in developing UAVs, for example, or developing long-range missiles, they were assassinated from the first days of the war, which gives you which raises some questions. Who assassinated them? Was Mossad directly involved in it, or their assets on the ground? The second thing that we have to realize is, for example, Jaish al-Islam, Ahrar al-Sham, and these groups, when they started invading the suburbs of Damascus, where the Syrian advanced, let's say, air defense systems were located, they were invading these territories, and instead of taking over these, let's say, air defenses and using them against the Syrian Army Air Force, they were literally burning this equipment, which some people may think these people are crazy. They're burning or destroying these advanced weapons. But no, this was the task. They were tasked to do it. So overall, when you see the war that Syria has undergone through and the war that may come in the future, and combine these two scenarios together, everything that happened in Syria in the 12 years, it starts to make sense to you in a way that why Syria was targeted, why the defensive military facilities were targeted, why Syria's chemical stockpile were targeted, and why they have made all these chemical scenarios in Syria in order to deprive Syria of its chemical weapon capabilities and say that the Syrian government is unreliable and we have to destroy these chemical weapons, which, by the way, in the article, they say very clearly that Syria developed these chemical weapons as deterrence measures against the Israeli threat to Syria. They never said that Syria developed the chemical weapons to attack Israel. They said for deterrence reasons against Israel. But they have never mentioned that Israel, because they say, because the Syrian side couldn't match the Israeli aerial superiority, that's why Syria developed chemical weapons. In my opinion, this is only probably one of the minor reasons why Syria developed chemical weapons. The main reason is because Israel acquired its own nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and chemical weapons. And that's why Syria was in a position, especially after 1973 war. People need to see these things in a broader context, because after 1973 war, Hafez al-Assad strategy was always to strike a comprehensive Arabic deal with Israel, and not state by state. And when Egypt left the Arab-Israeli conflict with a singular peace agreement, Jordan left with a singular peace agreement, and the Gulf countries started becoming closer and closer to Israel, Syria remained alone in this Arab-Israeli conflict. And if Israel attacks Syria in the southern borders, in Daraa or in Qunaytira, and advances inside Syrian territories and occupies it like they did with the occupied Golan, you don't have any weaponry to deter Israel from the first place into penetrating into the Syrian territories and grabbing more lands like they did with the Golan Heights. So the idea was to deter Israel from occupying more territories in Syria. This was the real reason, which is not mentioned in the article.
I think, so just coming back to the war between the wars. So effectively, does this mean that Israel has perceived that the operations that they're carrying out currently now, since 2011, since the civil war began, since the Western terrorist proxy war against Syria to destabilize Syria, to partition Syria, to depose the Syrian government, the internationally recognized Syrian government, to a large degree on behalf of Israel and the security of Israel in the region, as you've pointed out. But does this mean that Israel perceives this war, this 12 years, as an opportunity to effectively destroy Syria's defense capability and their offense capability? So they see it as a war against a strategic threat to Israel between the previous hot escalation between Israel and Syria and the potential looming escalation between Israel and Syria. Is this what they actually are talking about?
If we want to contextualize the Syrian conflict, we have to see after Bashar al-Assad came to power, the Western world was excited to see a guy who is educated in the West. Probably from their point of view, he is westernized and he will pursue closer relationship. And Assad tried to pursue closer relationship with the West. And this was also on the expense of Russia, by the way. And the Russians weren't very happy with the Syrian approach toward the West. And they were trying to strike a deal with the European Union called the Syrian European Association Agreement, which will lift lots of tariffs over the European products coming to Syria, similar to what Syria did to Turkey. And when the war against quote-unquote terrorism started, Syria cooperated closely with the CIA against Al-Qaeda elements, whether it's in Syria or in Iraq. And the disagreement between Syria and the collective West was about Israel all the time. There is no single American official who came to Syria and told Syria, like, why you're not cooperating with us against terrorism, or why you're not pursuing better relationship with Europe or Turkey, or the only reservation was Israel. Like, remember in 2003 when after the collapse of Iraq, when Colin Powell came to Syria and he said the list of demands that they asked for from Syria, they were all about Israel. Stop supporting Hezbollah, stop supporting Hamas, close the Palestinian offices in Syria, cut your relationship with Iran, and come to our camp. And this was, in my opinion, the correct decision that Syria made back then, that no, we want to diversify our relationship between the East and West, but with good intentions, and we want to have for you to treat us as peers with respect, and not as we are your subordinates. Like, the United States doesn't understand this. The United States demands and dictates. This is what Syria cannot tolerate. And in my opinion, the deal breaker for the United States was the 2006 war. They had a huge project in the region that was called, according to Condoleezza Rice, she said, the war against Lebanon by Israel is the birth pawn of the new Middle East. Only a human freak can compare the destruction of a country to the birth of a child, right? So they saw that as an opportunity to redraw the map in the Middle East. And Syria literally foiled this. We give credit to of course, Hezbollah fighters, because they were on the ground fighting, but the big portion of the weaponry that they used, and we're talking about the game-changing weaponry, for example, the anti-tank rockets, and Hezbollah showing to the entire world the massacre of Mirkava, it's called in Arabic, like tens of them are being burned in southern Lebanon. This has destroyed first the big title that Israel is an invincible army that cannot be defeated. And secondly, the army industry of Israel was hugely damaged because of that. That 20 to 30 years old Soviet weaponry, they were capable of destroying modern Mirkavas. And these were all from the Syrian stockpiles. So I think the West, or the United States and Israel, they never forgave Syria for that, never. And for destroying their project in the region, which they came back later through the gate of the Arab Spring. It's the same. They wanted to divide the region into vertical lines in any ways. This was from 2006. When the project was failed, 2006 war came, and 2008, let's remember Hamas and Jihad, for the first time, they used the rockets, anti-tank rockets, in 2008. And this was also from the stockpile of Syria. Hezbollah delivered them through Egypt to the Gaza Strip. So all these scenarios, if we put the timeline of these events, we understand how the 2011 war erupted and how did they engineer this coup d'etat. I call it a proxy war, but it's basically coup d'etat. They tried to divide the Syrian army and turn part of the Syrian army against each other, right? But they didn't do it through conviction. Some of them probably they were convinced, but Qatar paid tens of millions of dollars for corrupted Syrian officers to defect or leave the Syrian army and join the so-called Free Syrian Army. When we read the Syrian literature, it's crazy that this is not even mentioned. It's like Syrian army soldiers started to defect and joining the Free Syrian Army because they want justice and democracy for Syria. It's like like even if you tell this story to a 3-year-old child, this 3-year-old child may ask some questions about this narrative. It looks so beautiful. It looks so Hollywood style, the people for good and bad, and even Azmi Chaba.
It's also not the first time that they've used this method to try to divide the military in Syria. When was it? Back in the 50s?
50s. In the 80s also they tried with the Muslim Brotherhood.
The military actually reported the effort, and that's what basically completely deflated it. But I mean, this war against Syria and against the region has been ongoing since Syria's independence in 1946 from French mandate, and the text, the kind of the blueprint has been the same throughout. The weaponization of Muslim Brotherhood, the division of the armed forces, the attempt to foment sectarian division in the country, right? I mean, we've seen it before through history. And then, of course, you have the Israeli clean break strategy also. So all of this has been leading to where we are now. But I just want to come back to the report because I've read it now 2 or 3 times. And actually, on the third reading, I'm starting to actually get that there's actually a begrudged respect for Syria in this report, right? So despite the 12 years of, complete disproportionate force being used against this country, and the Syrian Arab Army was really, certainly in the beginning, not equipped to deal with the level of invasion, the sophistication of weaponry, the backing, the funding, the sponsorship of those proxy armed groups that invaded Syria. And until September 2015, when Russia came in, obviously with the air power, ISIS was gathering momentum with the help, of course, of its Western backers. And there were statements put out by officials in Israel that they would prefer to see ISIS in power than to see President Assad stay, etc. So it was very clear from the beginning who was backing ISIS to gain momentum, to gain power in the country. But what I'm getting from this report, for example, they talk about the Scientific Research Center as being the most advanced in the Middle East before 2011. This is fascinating for me because this is saying that, as you've pointed out, for Israel, the greatest threat in the region, and therefore the country against which there should be the most concerted effort to destabilize it and to devastate its military capability, is Syria, right?
Actually, this is also an information warfare. For Israel, it's very important to keep its neighboring countries blind on certain technological, scientific, and military aspects. For example, I was in France studying in Sciences Po in 2009 and 2010, and there is a faculty about nuclear studies. And I just, my naive me asked if people from Syria or from Iran or other countries can study in this faculty, and they said only particular like handful of people from handful of countries can actually enroll in this, and this gives you this puts everything into the right context, which is the purpose is not only to stop the development of certain weaponry, it's also to stop the people from having the knowledge about this weaponry, because once you have the knowledge about either technology or weaponry, you can use it for both purposes, for defensive and offensive, but also to export it to other countries, right? You can export your expertise. For example, North Korea, they have a huge expertise about weaponry and technology, and they deliver this to countries like Syria, like Iran. People need to understand that there's so many people make jokes about North Korea and everything, and I personally I understand where are they coming from, especially if they're not this liberal people. But it's a closed country, right? It's a very difficult place to live. But at the same time, these people have so much knowledge nowadays that it's the only country probably after that still has its nuclear weapons and were not manipulated to give up its nuclear weapons, just like other countries did, and they were destroyed completely. Even Trump's visit to North Korea, they cannot be persuaded. They are aware, not only technologically, but also intellectually, they understand their enemy. They understand how the other side thinks, that the other side is waiting you so that you don't have a deterrence capacities again. So in my opinion, Israel saw the conflict in Syria as an opportunity to destroy its defensive capabilities and especially its strategic weaponry, to exhaust the army and entrench it in the entire Syrian territory so that it can be involved in the Syrian war. So why would Israel support the Islamist terrorists in southern Syria against the Syrian army, giving them cash, giving them medical treatment? If you ask any Israeli, look, this is my conviction, the Israeli side, of course, they don't want Al-Qaeda to rule Syria completely, but at the same time, they don't want for the Syrian army to win on Al-Qaeda. So they give, this is the fourth generation of asymmetrical warfare, which is you give enough amount of support to the side that is incapable of winning on the Syrian army in this equation, but you give them enough weaponry for the war to continue. And so that this side cannot be crushed. And this is the same thing now in Idlib. In Idlib, if the Syrian army today decides to enter Idlib, it will be a lot of bloodshed, but the outcome of the conflict is pretty clear for everyone that the Syrian army will win decisively. That is why what they do is just when the patient is in the hospital and he's dying and they're just giving him the enough medication for this person to breathe, right? This is what they're doing. This is what they're doing with Idlib right now. They know that it's the largest safe haven for Al-Qaeda terrorists in the entire world. And at the same time, they don't want the Syrian army to capture it. They want the status quo. The status quo means drain of resources and also Syria's incapability of restoring its sovereignty, its reconstruction. Syria is built on an amazing highways that can connect cities, governorates to each other. Like the far east, Qamishli and Hasake is connected to Aleppo. Aleppo is connected to Latakia. Latakia is connected to Homs. Homs is connected to Damascus. And in every region, Hafiz al-Assad constructed different types of whether industrial or agricultural powerhouses, so that no governorate could have the absolute power over each other. So these governorates can all complement each other. But Aleppo cannot survive without Qamishli, and Qamishli cannot survive without Damascus. Everyone's fate is interconnected with each other. And this is how Hafiz al-Assad created a sort of economy that doesn't only connect the people on a financial interest level, but also it creates a situation that because of the interaction between different people on a business level and the trade level, we have now lots of interaction with people from Deir ez-Zor, al-Hasake in Aleppo. We're selling them the spare parts of their big trucks that they need to use for their agriculture. And now we know the people from Hasake and Qamishli, we meet with them, we eat bread with them, we drink tea with them, and this creates this harmony between the different people. The harmony was not only based on a government policy like you guys need to behave. No, it was also because of the economic interest between these different segments of the society that created this harmonic mosaic, that I would say. And this is why Syria is unstable now, because they just cut all these connectivities between the governorates. And this is why it was so important for the Syrian army to liberate the M5 highway. And now they're speaking about the M4.
The M4.
Sorry, maybe M4, yes.
M4, yeah.
These highways are detrimental for the recovery of the Syrian economy. And that's what the NATO knows. And that's why Erdogan is he's playing games with Syria. And I've been saying this for a very long time.
For people, the M5 is from Aleppo to Damascus, and the M4 is from Aleppo to Latakia, right? Yeah. And at the moment, the Syrian army has control of the territory to the south of the M4, and the kind of buffer zone is patrolled by Turkey and Russia, as far as I understand.
But the Turkish side, they don't want to give up their privileges.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah.
No problem at all. The problem is also I truly want to express my the Russian side was heavily embedded with the Turkish side for obvious reasons, and it has its own strategic reasons, right, regarding Ukraine, regarding the phosphorus, regarding lots of things. But at the same time, Erdogan is also a very good geopolitical chess player, and it took him only for re-election to restore his previous Erdogan. Yeah, it's pretty obvious from the beginning what Erdogan was playing with, also with Russia. Both sides were playing with each other, but Erdogan, in my opinion, is always outsmarting the Russian side. And then the Russian side, when they are fed up, they're coming with excessive force. They're coming with excessive force and using lots of, I would say, air power against the proxies of Turkey just to send a message to Erdogan. And I think Syrians are losing so much time and losing so much opportunities to recover and restore their economic health because of these big geopolitical games that both sides are playing with each other.
Absolutely. And we saw this actually in the final liberation of Eastern Aleppo. The same thing. You know, Russia to a huge... The only area where Russia accelerated the liberation campaign was in Eastern Ghouta. And I think at that time it was because they knew there was a major threat from America and Israel to reinforce the armed groups in Ghouta and to maintain control in Ghouta. And also there is, I believe there's an air defense base that was under control of the terrorists in Eastern Ghouta. And that was the only time that Russia actually really accelerated things and didn't put a foot on the brake pedal at any time. Now, of course, we are seeing a degree of acceleration, I think, from Russia. We're seeing intensified bombing in Idlib. We're seeing intensified attacks on the area surrounding Al-Tanaf, the southeastern illegal military base, which is effectively being converted into a terrorist hub on the borders with Jordan and Iraq. It's a major threat, I think, for Syria now. And I think Russia has recognized that and is now leading the aggression against the terrorist groups in this area and in the Badia, in the Syrian central desert areas. And they have been firing missiles from Tartus, from the Navy, into the ISIS positions east of Homs in the last few days since the attack on the Syrian Arab Army soldiers in Deir ez-Zor, which was a tragedy. 25 Syrian army soldiers killed and dozens wounded.
I will mention about this incident, and this incident is directly connected to the U.S. escalation in Syria. I would say with great confidence, even before the statement of the Syrian Foreign Ministry, I posted it on Twitter and on Facebook, and I said, this is an American escalation. People may think that this is a conspiracy. This is the truth of the matter. The ISIS sleeping cells are operating on the peripheries of the American occupation sites in Syria. And and they don't attack the American sides. They're attacking the Syrian army posts all the time. And the reason for this escalation from ISIS now on Syrian army, they massacred over 20 soldiers because the United States is building up its military now on the shores of the Euphrates, and they want to cross the river and they want to occupy the territories between Al Tanaf border crossing and Al Qaim border crossing in order to seal the borders between Syria and Iraq completely. And it's not a coincidence that these ISIS attacks are happening now in this direction. It's so clear for any person who can follow, can read geography and can read some geopolitics to see that this is an American escalation. It's not even an ISIS escalation. But from the Russian side, it's always when, in Arabic we say, when the knife starts touching your bone, like you see that blood is coming and you're like looking at it, but then when it touches your bone and you know that it's going to cut your hand, then you respond, right? And the experience of the 12 years has taught us so many things now. The enemy doesn't understand the language of diplomacy until you force them to come to the negotiation table. I am for negotiation, but you have to show strength to the enemy. That why the enemy would come and negotiate with you if you stopped all the hostilities against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and all these forces, and now you want to convince Erdogan to come and sit in a civilized way? No, Erdogan invested so much in Syria, and he put his neck in this investment. He invested his future, gambled his future for this, right? And he occupied the northern belt, he occupied Idlib, and he has proxy forces there, and he wants to create a buffer zone, and he wants to legitimize his occupation of these territories. How do you force them back? You need to destroy the fortifications of the Al-Nusra in southern Idlib. And how do you do that? You need to bring now artilleries, you need to bring the Air Force, you need to bomb them for weeks. And nobody can say that there are civilian casualties there because the fortifications are all in rural areas. They are all in either agricultural territories, in places where no residential buildings are, right? So this has to be done so that Erdogan comes and sits on a negotiation table. Otherwise, in my opinion, Erdogan will not come. And of course, Israel sees everything in Syria they monitor everything with great interest, and they find they have very good intelligence. Anytime they detect any reinforcement that can improve the reconstruction or fasten the reconstruction of the Syrian army or its capabilities, they always ready to strike. And they're spying warplanes. They are spying Syria 24/7. The map and the Mediterranean is full of Israeli spy cargos. They're just recording everything in Syria. And imagine if Syria does this, sends spying planes near the waters in Haifa or in Tel Aviv, and then strikes inside Syria, inside Israel. It's always what is not allowed for others, it's allowed for Israel. And with no questions asked about this. Imagine a country is bombing the capital of another country, and then the number of mainstream television that report about it is zero. Like, were it not for Twitter, and were it not for Twitter, were it not for you, were it not for us on these social media platforms, nobody even hears about these attacks on Syria, which tells you something, right, about where is
control. It's the actual control of the media, of everything. And actually, there's something in the report that I found really interesting. But I just want to come back to one section of the report where they actually talk about, how powerful and orderly the Syrian Arab Army was before the war started in 2011. And they do lay out the strategic threats. So first of all, you have the tech, the ground-to-air missiles, the ground-to-ground missiles, anti-tank missiles, etc., and unmanned aerial vehicles, advanced sea or naval missiles, air defense systems, and in addition to the arsenal of unconventional weapons that they talk about, chemical weapons, and the nuclear capabilities. Now, I kind of want to just touch on the nuclear capabilities because this reminds me of Netanyahu in the UN talking about, you know, the threat from Iran and his picture of a ticking bomb, etc. To what extent do you think this report is accurate, and to what extent is it preparing the excuses for increased Israeli aggression?
I will be very honest with you. They are mixing lots of truths, true statements with allegations in order to prepare the Israeli side to any potential escalation in the region. And there are so many local reports or regional reports nowadays that say there is going to be a clash soon between Hezbollah and the Israeli side, and the Syrian side will not stand by and watch Israeli side is only bombing Lebanon, and the Syrian side might be also involved in this if the Americans also escalate in Syria. So I truly believe that the two segments that they spoke about, the chemical weapons and the nuclear weapons, are completely unrealistic, because to develop a nuclear, especially the nuclear part, you need to establish reactors. You need to have the infrastructure. You need to have lots of uranium in Syria. But Syria doesn't have these things. And so even if they want to start building nowadays, Israel is watching everything in Syria. And I want to mention an information about the chemical weapons of Syria. Israel has the technology to detect the movement of the Syrian army previously when they had chemical attacks. The moment the Syrian army moves its stockpile from one place to another, Israel knows exactly the movement in Syria, right? So they can directly start striking Syria preemptively from their perspective before Syria even initiates. But because we know that these chemical weapons were meant for deterrence, Syria never used them against Israel and never intended to use them unless Israel wants to occupy territories. And this is something very important we have to know after 2011 and all these alleged chemical attacks in Syria. If the Syrian army used one of these chemical weapons against these terrorist groups or against its own people, Israel would have detected it like even before the Syrian army launched it, and they would have detected it and they would have delivered this information to their partners, whether the United States or Britain or etc. They don't have this information because it never happened. And today I was talking to Dr. Pierce Robinson about the latest Duma report, and we were talking about the inconsistencies in the report. For example, the Ghouta report, for example. How can the OPCW made a mistake about the degree from which the missile or the rocket which carried the sarin gas and exploded in the Ghouta? How can they miss a 30-degree difference between the reality on the ground and what they have reported in their 30-degree makes a huge difference from which side the rocket came. And the same thing applies to the Duma alleged chemical. In Duma, it never happened. There was no chemical attack there from the first place. The Ghouta was different from the Duma in 2018. So all this information and that Syria may have unconventional weapons, in my opinion, Syria doesn't have an interest to have chemical weapons at all. Chemical weapons are very outdated, they are ineffective, and it inflicts self-damage. Even if you want to use, probably in the 80s and the 90s, you were able to deter an enemy from invading your country. But in 2023, nowadays, this weaponry are so outdated that nobody even wants. It's a burden. It's a burden on Syria. Nuclear is a completely different thing, but Syria doesn't have the infrastructure for that. And in my opinion, if Syria wants to establish a nuclear reactor in Syria, so who are the candidates who are going to help Syria for this? Iran, North Korea, and Russia. Russia has no interest in doing that, right? Iran has so much pressure already from the West for its own nuclear program, and they just want to release their assets from the Western banks that they're trying to strike deals with the Western side. So North Korea, Are we really expecting North Koreans to come and establish nuclear reactors in Syria? Okay, where are they? Where are we going to bring the uranium for that? Like, there are so many things that Syria.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's actually a claim in the report, I think, that Syria might even export natural uranium to Iran. I mean, this was just, I was like, okay.
To my knowledge, maybe I'm wrong. I haven't seen at any point that Syria has nuclear or uranium, sorry, in its stockpile, or I don't know. I'm just saying I don't know because it's a very unusual thing, and even the uranium, I probably needs some basic electricity and some necessities to preserve these materials. Right? I'm not sure, but it's like Syria is
We
no.
don't have fuel.
I believe the biggest danger for Israel represents in a few things. One is in the surface-to-surface missiles that Syria develops, and those are so. Even it's mentioned in the report that they're very accurate. What the Syrians basically do, they buy missiles from Russia and China, and they develop this missile. They make it even better. And when the Russians came to Syria in 2015, and they watched our T-71 tanks, they were like, wow, you bought T-71 from us and you converted it into T-90s. It's like, what did you do with these tanks? You bought lots of tanks from us for cheap prices and you made them like T-90s, the more advanced ones, right? Syrians, no, they have this knowledge. So in my opinion, yes, the surface-to-surface missiles, long-range missiles, the unmanned vehicles that the Iranian side is integrating in Syria, but most importantly is the air defenses. This is the game changer for Israel. They're panicking because Russia proved itself to be a very good ally for Syria, except when it comes to Israel. They just have no interest to engage. I understand this is their own national security interest or geopolitical interest. They have their own interest. We can't match in everything, right? So who's going to replace this? Iran. Iran is establishing, according to many reports, a network of air defense systems in Syria, and they're trying to integrate Syria's old air defenses with the new Iranian air defenses, because these defenses have different codes, right? They can't match. So there need to be some work to be done at an engineering level to operate these air defenses in Syria and gradually replace the old ones with the new ones. This is the game changer for Israel. The moment Israel doesn't have an air superiority, the only biting teeth that Israel can have against Syria is the nuclear weapon. It's a nuclear weapon, because if they don't have an aerial superiority, since the 1967 war till today, Israel won on its enemies with aerial superiority, thanks to its aerial superiority. If they no more have that and their aerial superiority is broken, the only game changer weaponry that they could resort to is the nuclear weapon. And they don't want, in my opinion, in 73, they tried to scare the Egyptian and the Syrian sides that they will use nuclear weapons. But geographically speaking, Vanessa, where Israel can use nuclear weapons on Syria, if they want to use it, they have to use it either in Homs or in Aleppo or in the desert or in Deir ez-Zor. Using it even in Damascus, it's too dangerous, even for their own sake. Contamination, speaking, and everything. Syria and Israel are too close to each other. So this type of weaponry can even affect them in Israel. And Israel has another geographical deficit. We say the Israeli geography is too thin, and the population is so dense. So one Scud missile from the Syrian side, let's say if it's on Haifa or it's on Tel Aviv, it can cause a very big casualties compared to an open territory. In Syria, you have so many open territories, right? But in Israel, it's like it's all intensely populated and very close to each other. So I truly believe that Israel also has lots of weaknesses and strategic weaknesses that their enemies can use. But Israel has the backing of lots of powers, in my opinion.
And actually, that's what I kind of probably want to end on, because I know that you need to go, and I've taken up a lot of your time. But what I found fascinating, although we know the depth of communication between Israel and, as you mentioned, its allies, and not even its allies, its kind of strategic partners, let's say,
Yeah.
in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, etc. And this report makes this absolutely crystal clear to me. So, for example, they talk about their strategic plan could include damage to the research center, but we need to also point out to people that the actual research and development now is being done underground in all of these scientific research centers. And Israel has been consistently frustrated in its attempts to cause any damage to these underground development centers, right? The damage is always superficial. Partly because, if I understand correctly, because they're firing missiles either from long range or from aircraft, still from long range. They need to actually be close to be able to really get underground to these centers. So they're talking about damage to the research centers, which of course they've been trying to do for some time. But then what I find interesting, they talk about, and I'm taking this from the report, using a variety of tools that are not just airstrikes, analysis and monitoring of supply chains and damage to them, promoting sanctions against from the United States against personalities involved in military buildup in Syria, and diplomatic and raising consciousness actions. And then, to add to this, they go on and talk about, for example, they can help to channel aid for civilian rehabilitation in Syria as a kind of, sweetener for Syria not to develop its military to defend itself against Israel, and also to strengthen intelligence and operational cooperation with veteran peace states and the normalization countries of recent years, and to address common challenges related to Syria. So for me, this is quite extraordinary. This just lays out their strategy, their intelligence strategy, and how they work, the hand in the puppet, basically, instructing the US where to put sanctions, how to dampen down on Syrian rehabilitation, etc. Quite incredible.
It also shows the so-called Syrian American Council, the Council for American Islamic, all these organizations in the United States who are working day and night to impose more sanctions on the Syrian people, that they are collaborating with the Zionist lobby there. Because these organizations in Syria, they don't say that they're lobbyists, but they do lobbying there, right? They're unregistered lobby groups, and only the Qatari and the Israeli side are cooperating with them in order to inflict more damage to the Syrian economy. The Emirati side aren't really interested at the moment to have bad relations with Syria. Of course, what the Emiratis did with this normalization of relations is horrible for the region. But I want always to see the impact on the military aspect of it, right? Like since 1973, when Anwar Sadat left the Arab-Israeli conflict, Syria had no choice but to strike a strategic relationship with Iran. And if the UAE back then or the Saudi Arabia were ready to fill the gap or to fill the vacuum of Egypt, Syria would have resorted to these Arabic countries. So these Arabic countries, whether they strike a deal with Israel or not, they don't have any influence on the actual combat situation on the ground between Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Israel. The only parties that have an impact there are the Syrian side, the Iranian side, Hezbollah, Hamas, Jihad, these groups. Whether you agree with them or not, I'm not saying anything. But the weaponry, the technology, the fighting power, everything is coming from these countries. Nobody asked any penny from the Saudis or the Emiratis in favor of them. The only thing that the Syrian side probably asked them not to fund the Israeli side if a war erupts, not to give
Yeah.
them probably some fuel, for their jets. That's probably the only demand from the Syrian side to the Saudis and to the Emiratis. But I've been following the Emirati and Saudi influencers on social media quite some time. I wanted to understand their point of view, and it's quite obvious that they're doing this because they have an economic vision in the region in a way that they don't want anymore to be engaged in any conflict with Israel, because this only is stopping their economic development from their perspective, in order, for example, to host a World Cup, or in order to host the big events in their countries that shows the why do you think Saudi Arabia is spending hundreds of millions now on football players to bring them to the Saudi League? Because they have a bid, they want to organize a World Cup, and they can't organize a World Cup if they are at war with Israel. Like officially, Saudi Arabia and Israel don't have any sort of relationship. And if anyone thinks that Saudi Arabia could win a bid to host the World Cup when they don't have official relationship with Israel, they would be so illusioned. And the same thing applies for Qatar. Qatar has very good relationship with Israel. Qatar is considered by the United States a major non-NATO ally, which tells you everything we need to know about this country. And then Al Jazeera comes and claims that they are pro-Palestine, and they host all these figures that they are championing the Palestinian conflict. What Qatar did basically, they on a media level, they support the Palestine, but on a military level, on a political level, on the important level, they have destroyed the strength of the resistance against the Israeli side. If anyone comes and tells you that they are with Palestine, but they are against Syria, this person is either completely detached from the reality, or is part of the game. Is part of the conspiracy against the Palestinians. Because how are the Palestinians going to get their material support, tangible support, in order for them to continue fighting? Okay, probably you don't want them to resist with arms. That's your problem. But the Palestinians who want to carry arms and resist and not to give up their territory, I'm talking about these people, right? Because every time they glorify them, when any Palestinian uses a gun against, or a rocket against Israel, glorify this operation. But where did this weapon come from? How this technology arrived in Palestine? Who gave them this support? Why do you fight the source of the strength of Palestine and at the same time come and say, I'm with Palestine? This is an utter hypocrisy that I cannot stress enough how many people, even unfortunately among the Palestinians, there are, and this is just they're damaging their own cause. So I myself, I was very disappointed by so many people. I went one time here to demo, and Palestinians were calling me the Assad guy, and and it makes me sad, because all this war happened in Syria because of Syria's position on this case, and Syria paid very huge price for it. And now, but there is a matter of principle in Syria, and I think Syria has chosen a path, and they cannot back off now, and they cannot now strike a deal with the United States. And President Assad was very clear about this in the last interview with Sky News. He said there is nothing new with the United States, the talks that are being held in Oman, and two, we don't have hope at all that the US would change. This means it's either a political stalemate in Syria or escalation. There is no solution coming from regional and international powers to finish this situation. It's political stalemate, military stalemate, or escalation, and then solution.
Do you think we're definitely, I mean, I have a personal view, but do you think we're heading for escalation, military escalation?
This is not my analysis. I received information from Syria that says the last two military maneuvers that the Syrian army initiated, one of them in the deserts and one of them in Hama, those were two scenarios for first engaging with any sort of escalation from the American side in the Euphrates or from the Idlib side. So they're getting ready for clash, probably. And the imagery and the type of production that they posted, it shows that they're sending a message. And yesterday, when there was a retaliation on the Koniko and Al Omar fields, and some people on Twitter, they deny it, but it happened. Rockets were fired on American sides because of the knowledge and the concrete intelligence knowledge that the Syrian side has, which indicates that the Americans are preparing to seal the borders with Iraq. So and people were, of course, the anti-Assad side, they always underestimate these things or try to mock and ridicule these things because they have no dignity at all. Syria is not going to engage against a superpower alone. There is going to be Iranian support, there's going to be Russian support in this. I truly believe that the Russians and the Iranians, they will stand with Syria in this if there is a clash with the Americans.
Well, I mean, Russia has, I think, sent a very clear message with the recent, clashes between Russian aircraft and U.S. drones and aircraft. I mean, more than 340 incursions by U.S. aircraft into Russian, I don't know what you call it, the area around the Russian plane. And now this recent spate of missile launches from the Navy, the Russian Navy, which again, for me, is a clear message. It's saying, okay, we're not going to risk clashing with you in the air, but we have the power to damage, to wipe out your military bases in 5 minutes if we decide to do this, right? I mean, this is it's a very strong message, I think.
I truly think that the Americans are also increasing their manpower. They have now new airplane carriers that entered the Gulf Sea. And let's hope that the escalation won't happen because at the end the people will pay the price. But it's always like this, Vanessa. You just read every single conflict, and there is no conflict that can be solved unless both sides are rational, right? And I truly believe that the American rulers, and I'm not talking about Biden and all these clowns, I'm really talking about the rulers of the United States. Those are criminal psychopaths, and those people are not ready to give up on any inch unless you force them to back off. And yesterday I was discussing with a Syrian guy who was telling me we can't compromise with the United States. We can't give them anything so that they compromise with us, right? And I thought about it long enough, and I was like, Syria is not as strong as the United States. Syria cannot offer incentives to the United States. But if you offer an incentive to the bully, you're only encouraging the bully to bully you more. And this is the unfortunate truth. Like you don't have there is no middle way in this. You either face it or you lose your sovereignty. There is no in between in this. And Syria has chosen to go in this path, and I think it will take so much time, and people will suffer a lot. And it's a very, very difficult path, and a lot of people will suffer psychologically, physically, and everything. But you have to choose. You have to choose a path now. I mean, when the Nazis occupied France or occupied the rest of Europe, most of the people said, we can't defeat the Nazis. Why would we resist them, right? Only a very minority of people resisted the Nazis in Western Europe and carried arms against them, right? But at the end of the day, now we are in 2023. Who do we honor? Do we honor the people who said, we can't defeat the Nazis, or we honor the people who carried the arms and fought against them, right? Sometimes it's a matter of time. I mean, power is a circle. Nobody can stay powerful forever. Personally, you can't stay powerful forever, and all empires, they pass through circles as an empire. And I truly see in the Ukraine war that the United States is losing its grip on so many places around the world. And Syria has to wait. Unfortunately, Syria is not as strong to change geopolitical equations now on the international level, but they have to wait. They have to be patient, and the people will suffer, unfortunately, until the the gradual collapse of the empire starts and a multipolar system emerges. And in a multipolar world, Russia and China must create parallel financial systems so that all these sanctions that the US are imposing on Syria and other countries would be just an ink on a paper. Otherwise, the bulldog will continue bulldogging.
Kevork, thank you so much. I found that really fascinating myself. I could have listened to you for another hour, as always. But thank you for your time, and thank you for helping me to sort of go through the whole report. I do recommend that people read it because it's a very interesting insight into the workings of Israeli intelligence and military strategists. It gives, I think, one of the best insights that we've seen in recent years, actually. So thank you very much. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day and speak to you very soon.
Thank you so much.
All right.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Bye.